What's up, everybody? Hello, welcome to the Hustling Sideways podcast. I'm Allen Halas. I'm a music writer.
And I'm Jim Love, and I'm a keynote and motivational speaker.
And this is episode number 48.
48. We have to look at each other and make sure, but that's correct. Yes. We are coming up on I keep saying 1 year, a 2-year anniversary. I don't know why I have 1 year in my head, but it's like that's way longer than a year. It's 2 years.
Hey, I mean, you know what? Pandemic years just kind of come and go.
That's true. They just don't count. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
but it is currently like 2 days after Christmas.
Yep.
I hope you all had an amazing holiday.
Did you get everything you wanted?
No, but I never do. I'm like kind of on like the crappy list. I think they call it the naughty list. I suck a little. Like I'm just, I'm kind of a big bully.
Okay.
And
I just never.
Yeah.
The thing is, I don't ask. I should
That's
ask.
a good point. Yeah.
I should make a point.
But I have fun. I mean, I go home and I enjoy myself and I have fun. But I'm not the type that's going to be waking up expecting a lot of gifts from the big man because he's just not a big fan. So that's fine.
I ate all the cookies every year.
That's the best part.
That's my problem. That's my downfall.
But it is great. It is relaxing. It is late December. I hope that you're all off of work and not off of your side hustle, though. Am I right? Because that never ends.
I was going to say, I'm actually probably actively doing work on something
Correct.
while you're listening.
As we are, as we always do. But that's how entrepreneurs roll. That's how we make it work. And but we're excited to be here. As you know, we like to introduce you all to our friends. We have a very special guest today. I'll describe how we met because I think it's really cool. I love networking. I talk about networking all the time. But we have
a whole
Brady,
video on it.
Yes, we do have a whole thing on it. Yeah. We have Brady Henderson is our next guest. He's a civil rights lawyer, a lay minister, adjunct professor, and musician. So we're going to dive into the majority of that. But Brady, I would say how we met is I love networking, and I was at a networking event in Mequon, or as my mom calls it, Mequon. Shout out to my mom.
I've heard it called Mequon as well.
Yeah, Mequon. And
Mequon is correct for those.
Exactly, for those wondering, the Wisconsin folks in the room. So I was there. It was a wonderful event, and I met a woman named Karina who was awesome, and she was telling me all about her husband that does all these great things. I was like, I have a podcast. I should talk to him. And lo and behold, Brady, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. And we're excited to have you. You do a lot, number one. We usually have people who have like 2 things going on or like a thing and a half because they're not sure about what to do the next thing. But there's like 4 things. I mean, do you have time for stuff? Or are you just,
No, in fact, not at all. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the problem. In fact, I'm also probably the closer thing to the house parent in our family,
too.
Yeah. Every family, we've got 2 small kids.
Awesome.
And any family with small kids, somebody's kind of doing the school pickup, somebody's kind of doing more of the afternoons, and we both do. We share it. But I probably do at least half of it or a little more too. And with all that, no, there really isn't time. One of the things I've found for a long time is that I want to do a lot more things than I ever have time or mental energy to do.
Right.
I'm finally into the 40s, and it's amazing all the things I used to be able to do in terms of mental and physical energy when I was maybe 20, 25. And now I look back at that and just say, how did I ever actually do that?
I'm starting on that. I am very much in the same.
Starting to happen. Well, I will say
it won't get better. I'm sorry. It's just going to get worse.
Oh, I know.
He knows. 2 episodes ago, I was like, Alan, we're approaching 50 as an episode. He goes, I know. I'm 32. I'm going to be 50. I'm like, dude, that's not at all what I meant. So it was taken very out of context. But I like the mental energy. I know time. I always make the joke, and time is valuable. We use it in the way that's going to give us our energy. But the mental energy part is the important part. I mean, you have to, because having 2 children, a wife, a family, you have to dedicate so much to them and to being there, and then also all these things you do, and it's draining. And I know some of those things give you energy, but it's also you have to balance that out and know what's going to work for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of, we should mention that you are a civil rights lawyer by day. But you were also you did introduce all this.
Yeah, I said it all.
We were recording on a Friday. I'm very sorry.
What the hell is going on over there?
Never mind. You're good. I totally missed that part. You're good. Here.
So we were talking about mental energy.
Yes,
This is what happens. Demonstrating.
I swear I didn't mean to actually bring that in, but yes,
we're good. I was like, where is he going with this? Yeah. No, that's good.
But that brings me to ask, how did you kind of get your start, in that field and pursuing law? Was that, I don't know if that's something that people grow up and say, but was that something that, when did that start for you?
Yeah, I mean, some do. There are people who grow up in law. Maybe that a parent who was a lawyer, or they just know that's what I want to do. I was not one of those, though, really, to be perfectly honest. When I was a kid, I was the smart, nerdy kid, basically. I didn't do sports. I did academic things and music. I was that kid. And so because of that, you have certain things, and for me in the 80s and 90s growing up, I was a Stephen Hawking fan, Carl Sagan. So I was all about, I'm going to go be an astrophysicist, or I'm going to be a nuclear engineer. I was all about the science, and I'm still a science nerd. Technically speaking, I invented the nuclear powered coffee maker.
Whoa.
The reason no one really knows that outside of people close to me is that no one's yet been interested in building and or buying a nuclear powered coffee maker.
Very true.
So this is one of those products that exists on paper. But if you ever needed something to produce about 10,000 gallons of coffee per hour, with no carbon footprint, this would do it for you.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
So just
I drink a lot of coffee.
And I've never tried coffee, so I'm like on the other. I just don't.
my
I know
gosh.
I'm
am
very weird. Trust
I'm
me.
at a coffee shop just about every morning, so
Yeah.
I
As
will
most
tell
people
you, I might be in the market.
okay. So I'm
Nuclear
into
power, you say.
I'm into these nerdy thought experiments, right?
awesome.
And I won't go into all that, but just note, nuclear reactors heat water. What does your coffee maker do? It heats water. Why not cut out all the stuff in between?
That feels like that just clicked in like one day in your head of like, wait a
Exactly.
minute.
Why not? Why do we need all these electric power lines and stuff?
100%.
So anyway, I was the science nerd, right?
awesome.
And really what happened about high school is that I had an interesting combination of things. And I guess now I can say it. I don't know where some of these people are that may be bad-mouthed by it. I had some really bad math teachers and a couple of really bad science teachers, also a couple of really good ones. And so I started just hating doing more advanced math and some of what's necessary for engineering. And at the same time, I had some incredibly awesome civics and social studies teachers, just some amazing people. And they just instilled a love of civics, of kind of civic participation, of democracy, of the Constitution in me. And that carried through to college. So I ended up doing letters and political science and knowing I'm probably going to go to law school. This is probably what I want to do is some kind of constitutional law. But even in college, I was the weird side hustle guy. I never pared down well. I played in the orchestra. I sang in the advanced choir. I did classics and letters stuff, at the same time I'm doing political science. I never chose well on what to do. It was just sort of, I'm going to do everything.
Just the constantly over-involved students.
Absolutely. But it's amazing the experiences it gives
100%,
you. So I spent a summer doing an archaeological dig in Israel in the middle of college.
Oh, wow.
Is that a suburb of Chicago, or is that?
Yeah, as most Marquette states know. Israel,
That's
famously
really,
a suburb of
Yeah, I think you're talking about Skokie, actually, or the Evanston area. Yes.
An archaeological dig in Skokie, though.
That would actually be kind of cool.
Yeah,
it really would. But no, it's true. I spent a summer there digging at a place called Caesarea, this amazing ancient harbor, kind of wonder of the ancient world on the Mediterranean coast.
Wow.
And it's all these weird kind of things that caused it to happen. But I loved getting to know people who did different things than me and just learning what they did and really getting into it. And so I did stuff like that at the same time I was doing pre-law.
Okay.
Experiences like that tend to be largely useless in terms of career, but incredibly enriching. I mean, for being there about 8 weeks in that particular dig, it's amazing how often I think about something from it. It's absolutely amazing. And now doing some ministry work, that really comes out because we did so many things that had to do with Jewish and Christian sites and early faith and that kind of thing too. So, to go back to the original question, and I'm sorry, I'm digressing.
Oh, no,
this is what happens with the side hustle.
This is how we do podcasts.
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
worry. Digress the hell out.
So, I knew I wanted to do law. I did end up going to law school. So I grew up in Oklahoma. I went to the University of Oklahoma for both undergrad and law school. And I got a wonderful scholarship deal as part of why I stayed there. They were really aggressively recruiting national merit scholars at the time. Okay. And I was fortunate enough to become one. And there was a university president, David Warren, who's a former U.S. senator, and that just became his thing of what he wanted to do at OU is have the most national merit scholars.
Oh,
Like, all right. What it meant for me was twofold. One, I got a boatload of money that meant I could get out of school without debt, or without my parents having to just, mortgage houses for it or anything. And then the other thing it meant was amazing people there with me from all over the country who had come for similar reasons. Yeah. So, I'm still good friends with he's now a professor at Texas Tech in their meteorology and climatology department who came from Madison, Wisconsin for meteorology, because it's one of the things you come to Oklahoma for. If you want to study storms, that's storms the place to do it.
Yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. Yeah. Not just Sooner football.
Yeah. Exactly.
A lot more than that.
Well, and especially when like this year, when the Sooner football kind of sucks, like then you need to go study storms more. You get more interested in these other things.
It's interesting, with the Israel dig and, some of those experiences. I found I did a lot of mission trips in college. And I went to New Orleans a ton of times, and I've talked about this before, but the things I learned there and the experience I had to lead groups and, was doing it on 2 hours of sleep, but, sleeping on church floors, those things I learned in those moments taught me more about my career and situations than any class ever taught me, without question. Because, and to your point, you look back at those things of what did I do? It was leadership moments. It was times where I had to make a decision. And granted, I mean, education's wonderful. I want to make sure everyone's clear on that. Go to college, get educated, whatever it might be. But my informal education, doing extracurriculars and things I was interested in, were those things where I met people that taught me lessons, where I realized, and I made mistakes, and I was like, don't do that again. And that was so pivotal. And it sounds like you probably had moments like that where you look back now of that made a lot of sense, and that started maybe making your ministry path a little bit more clear, the areas that you want to really focus on.
The ministry path in a lot of ways really came later, but I think the experiences that set it up absolutely were part of that. Right. I would say I didn't just have moments of feeling like the extracurricular things or things like the dig were special in college. When I look back on it, that's most of what I remember are those things. If you ask me, Brady, what did you do in such and such class? Half the time I have to look at it and say, I don't remember a darn thing from the actual curriculum of this class. Yeah. In fact, I've started teaching at Marquette, this last fall as an adjunct professor there. And one of the things I had to do in the process of that happening was get them some information that included my old academic transcripts.
Oh.
And it was funny how I'm looking at these for the first time. I've probably looked at them in 15 years.
Yeah.
And so I literally see courses where I say, what was that?
Totally.
I don't remember
I'm the same
what this
way,
was.
And we've only been out of college for 10 years now. And I'm
no idea.
If I had to go back and look at specific classes, I would not be able to tell you what I learned in them.
Yeah.
I remember even walking out of college the day after I graduated and thinking, I know nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I was highly inebriated, which probably didn't help. But it was
that didn't help. It didn't help when I said it or when I was actually in college.
Right. No. But it's true. You remember the special moments. You don't remember the Tuesday 9 a.m. class. You remember the conversation you have with a friend, or going on a trip that was meaningful. That's what sticks with you. And I always tell students that now when I speak to them. I'm like, you're not going to remember again. Education's important. To be clear, but you won't remember those. Do the things, get good grades, but go way outside your comfort zone in moments that you wouldn't anticipate, and that's when you're going to learn, and you'll grow too. Of course, I know that sounds cliche, but a lot of people don't take that seriously, and
it's true.
That's it.
It's true.
Spot on. Yeah.
And one of the things as I work, with students now, I get really concerned just how much everything is going online for that reason. Online is great in that it democratizes a lot of education that was hard to. I mean, for folks who are in difficult life situations with small kids, things like that, with limited resources, or they're kind of stuck to a particular place with a job, the quote unquote traditional means of college like I did doesn't work. So a lot of things in terms of more online degree programs, they open up great college experiences academically to more people. They increase the equity. So I'm not criticizing their existence, but I also really try to tell students, hey guys, whenever you can, live in the dorms, be here, do things in person, interact with these other students, because that's the stuff you're really going to remember that's going to change you and make you sort of this broader, deeper person years down the road. It's not going to be what is on a PowerPoint, in a lecture hall.
Yeah, and I know you went to Oklahoma, but you sound Jesuit educated with that, with the way that you presented that. It's very, very true. Yes.
Yeah, I was very much like a. So I went to school for digital media, and so we shot videos. We were out shooting and going around places. I can tell you more about the projects that we did, like going out and being in the field and shooting, as opposed to what I learned in an actual classroom.
No doubt.
And I'm also a big believer that everything ties together, and that I did a lot of stuff freelance outside of school, and so I remember we've talked about on the show before about crazy shoots that I had to go do where I was at the airport or where I was at where I was at the airport or I was at a wedding or I was at something. I remember learning things there more than I think I learned in the classroom. So yeah, that outside of the experience, but I can only imagine, going to, another part of the world and going to experience that, the amount of things that now ties into what you're doing and would, both in your profession and on the side as well.
Yeah.
Well, so much of it to me is about just interacting with people you never anticipated interacting with, people who just have such different perspectives. And that's what I've always loved about travel, but also about a lot of things in education, is just being around people that have a different point of view, a different upbringing. And it makes all the difference in the world, especially when, like me, you're this kid from Oklahoma who, grew up in a small to mid-sized town, middle class, just kind of your average white middle American family where it's easy to miss a lot of what's going on in the world because of that. And just to kind of have this sort of sheltered, narrow view of things. And it makes all the difference in the world to just encounter stuff you never thought you'd encounter. And that happened in law school for me. When I finally did get to law school after my two undergrad degrees, I say finally, I still did it in 4 years. It just feels like longer now, I guess. But as I knew I was heading that direction. So after my first year, just kind of on some advice with some people I knew who I respected, they said, try to go do a volunteer internship at the local DA's office. They've got this great program there in Norman. There's a couple great people running it. And I thought that would be kind of interesting. I might do that versus try to kind of do traditional civil firm thing.
Right.
And that completely changed my life because it was interacting with stuff I just had never been part of. And in fact, my mother had a really great line at one point later when I ended up becoming an assistant DA. And that was actually where I started in law, really was going into criminal. And, my mother said something about, I can't quite do it justice, but it was something to the effect of, yeah, your dad and I worked so hard so you wouldn't have to be around people like that. Was sort of, was kind of her thing, right? It was like, so you wouldn't have to be around a bunch of criminals and stuff. Okay, I get it. But it's the truth. It gave such a different perspective on life and in terms of how things can change so much for a person. When I went to law school, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted my career to look like. I knew I loved constitutional law and government, but that's a pretty broad thing. That doesn't tell you this is what I want to do.
Right.
But I would tell everybody at that time, there are two types of law I absolutely know I don't want to do: criminal law and family law.
Yeah.
Within 6 months of becoming a lawyer, I took over the domestic violence docket at the DA's office, doing exactly criminal law and family law. And loving it.
Works. Right.
And it was an incredible experience. I did it for years. Became good at it, gained expertise and really got so much out of it. But it was never the kind of thing I would have anticipated ever.
So now that you progress then obviously to civil rights, was there any kind of moment that shifted that where you were like, coming out of domestic law and things like that, is there one kind of indicator that was like, okay, I'm going to pursue civil rights now?
One of the biggest, I had never given up that interest and I was always still doing things kind of on the margins of it. So all through my time at the DA's office, I was still helping to coordinate a couple of different civics programs in Oklahoma, one called We the People, Constitution and the Citizen, another called Project Citizen, which were all about civic engagement and teaching civil rights, kind of literacy to often high school students and sometimes middle schoolers. Wonderful programs. And I was always active in those all through it. So I never totally left it. But the interesting thing, I think, is that there were particular experiences that finally drove me out of my assistant DA job.
Yeah.
And one of the kind of key one was we had a change in the elected DA. I was somebody who did not get let go in the clean house. They're like, yeah, no, we like you. We know you're really good. Things were kind of okay for a few years with the new DA, but this kind of gets into some weird Oklahoma stuff. But basically, Cleveland County, where I was like Norman, where OU is, all this stuff sort of south of Oklahoma City. Oklahoma County is like Oklahoma City and kind of the main metro.
Yeah.
There are huge cultural differences in the courthouses of those two places to this day. And there was a man who had been DA in Oklahoma County for a long time called Cowboy Bob Macy.
That sounds very Oklahoma.
And
that
he
checks out.
had a string tie, and he was basically famous for three things. One was the string tie. The second was he liked to actually carry a gun in court and occasionally brandished it at people.
Oh my goodness.
No
Okay.
joke. You talk about privilege and
Yeah.
because
seriously.
the third thing he was famous for was sending black people to the death chamber. That was what he decided his purpose in life was. And the elected DA who came in to Cleveland County had been in his office, wasn't a Cowboy Bob figure himself exactly. It's hard to be.
But still, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean,
interesting to
getting
me,
a string tie alone these days is really tough. But he kind of carried that culture, and that culture is one that, unfortunately, even to this day, it's things like, oh, you don't really have the witness testimony you need to prove your case. Well, just maybe threaten somebody with something until they tell you what you want to hear and are willing to testify to it.
Right.
Oh, that's not the truth? Well, who cares? We're always right. We're
But
the
you
DAs.
said it, so you basically got pushed in that direction. So
Yep.
yeah.
So lots of unethical stuff, witness tampering, all kinds of things. And I got to the point where I was just kind of saying, hey, Greg, I can't keep doing this, man. I can't be part of this. It's reflecting on me. I can't just kind of let it continue to happen from people around me.
Yeah.
Luckily, when you're a domestic violence prosecutor, most places, nobody wants your job. So it's easy to kind of do what you want if you're good at it. And I was.
Sure.
I literally won awards and went and taught places and things like that. So they left me alone. Like, they didn't try to make me do really bad things.
Yeah.
But enough of it was going on around that it really got to the point where I just said, I can't keep silent about it though. And so I finally said to this elected DA, okay, either this stuff's got to stop or I've got to leave. I can't just be silent.
Yeah.
And he finally said, okay, then you got to leave. This is how we're going to do things.
Yeah.
And that's an experience that still pervades me to this day.
Yeah.
Prosecution is inherently an honorable and good profession, kind of like policing is in a way. But in the same way as policing, or in law enforcement generally, it can also attract people who are basically sociopaths, who really like to abuse power, who go into that precisely because it's a way to hurt people without going to prison.
Right.
And sometimes to kill people without going to prison. So unfortunately, it does attract that. And in places particularly where you have a populace that's easily manipulated to going along with it, kind of tough on crime jurisdictions, it can go on for years and years and years. Yeah, it's a perfect storm. And so that's what really drove me not just out of prosecution, but I think into civil rights, was seeing what was happening to people and just saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not okay.
It's a powerful experience.
Yeah, and that had to be tough to be now on the other side and being, standing up for the guy that probably doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the whatever, is probably expecting to get the DA that doesn't care about them, or the criminally appointed DA that really couldn't care less if they go to jail or not, or worse.
Or worse. And there's, and this is true in the civil court world too, but particularly in criminal justice, there's a great deal of cynicism because anyone who's been in it very long knows some things like, okay, most people are guilty in the system. So it's easy to just feel like, well, yeah, of course that dude's guilty.
Yeah.
Without really necessarily being open to say, yeah, but wait a minute, what if this is that one case out of several where he's actually not.
Right.
Yeah.
But you get so jaded because there's so much nonsense.
It almost feels like a rinse and repeat. Like, oh, here's another one.
Absolutely.
Like, here you go. Here's another one. Like,
Like
and it can be easy to get caught up in the monotony almost of feeling
Like
that
you're
way.
going through the motions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and even that happens to judges, not
Right,
just
I'm sure it
lawyers,
does.
because
I'm
it's
sure it
just
does.
hundreds, thousands of cases. I mean, I did, by the time I left Cleveland County, I think I was doing something like 400 cases a year, approximately. And these were cases where, there was a husband like strangling somebody. I mean, these were serious things. The joke commonly about my job was I was running, quote, the homicide prevention docket.
Yeah.
And the whole point of it was basically, let's try to stop things or do something so nobody kills the other person.
Right.
And that was essentially the measure of my job performance was, are people getting killed? Or am I doing the right things to step in and make them not get killed?
No pressure.
No pressure.
Yeah,
No
zero.
pressure.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you're good.
No pressure. And that's true in most parts of the country. And yet the people who often are assigned to those jobs were like me, very young very young assistant DAs, folks who are kind of wide-eyed. When I look back at how little I knew, I'm like, ooh, wow, it's amazing I didn't get anybody killed. And I didn't for 5 years.
Oh, there you go.
I didn't lose anybody. So that was
Yeah.
my measure of good job performance.
By those standards. Now, I feel like I don't have to ask, but when does ministry come in?
Feels like there's
Because I
pretty
feel
clear
like this
connection I'm
actually
forming.
now ties, hearing your
Yeah.
story, this definitely seems like a point where you would say it is time to maybe
follow
people
that
follow
path.
that path. Yeah.
Yeah, my history with ministry is strange. It's convoluted. In that when I was growing up, I guess our family is what are sometimes referred to as C&E Christians for Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
The idea that, well,
Priestess,
okay, we
that's what I
sort
said,
of,
yeah.
we're Christians, but we don't really do it every week. We're Christians sometimes, which is how a lot of people are. It's a very common thing. And so I actually spent years really rejecting a lot of it, not necessarily ever becoming, I think, a full atheist. I think I always believed in God in some fashion, but I didn't always like him. I wasn't always happy about this notion of there's somebody else in control because I just frankly saw so much awful stuff in the world that drove me nuts.
And I'm sure with your background, being where you were,
Right.
seeing the things go on that you saw go on. Yes.
Well,
Absolutely.
and one of the things that happened too, so growing up in Oklahoma, unlike growing up here in Wisconsin, there is this huge bent of really awful kind of right-wing co-option of Christianity.
Yeah.
That means for most people growing up, if you want to be a thinking progressive Christian, you got to get past all of these folks who use Christianity basically as a means for hate and abuse and that kind of thing, and have no problem doing that for their whole lives. And so it's this journey that you have to make back and say, no, that's not what it means, to be in church. That doesn't have to be what it means. To be a Christian, to be a person of faith. So I had this convoluted history for a lot of years. And when I finally really got it and started becoming a Christian wasn't until really about the end of college, where I look back and say, no, this is really when I understood what the heck this was all about. And it was this peace of God in my life, this feeling of actual personal connection. So it was a few years later, I think roughly about 14 years ago, that I first got what they often call the call to ministry, and it's a phrase everybody uses, but it's always really hard to explain to anybody. Well, what do you mean you were called? What was that?
Yeah,
Like,
I
well,
think
it's
people
kind of
assume-
hard to.
I would say people envision like this beam of light comes down and all of a sudden
The sky's open, right?
Exactly.
1 minute you're shopping at the mall and the next then you're in robes preaching. Yeah,
Exactly. And I wish it were, I
Right,
would,
make it a lot
would
easier.
be so fun if at some point in my life, I was like John Belushi and Blues Brothers and I'm listening to James Brown, give a sermon and then the light comes in.
Yeah.
I see the light. Man, I wish that were true. But in reality, it's so much more subtle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I've found about faith generally, in my own faith journey is in so many ways, so many things about faith, about God are so much more subtle than we want to give them credit for.
No doubt.
So much more nuanced than we want to. So I couldn't tell you the day I received the call, but I could tell you exactly where I was looking, I actually was in a Lutheran church in Oklahoma City when it happened. And the strange thing about it was basically a voicing, you're supposed to do this. And the weird thing about it is I was actually sitting through a really bad service by a pastor who really wasn't doing a good job, basically.
Yeah.
And I was kind of griping about it in my head.
Yeah.
And that's when it came to me. Well, you're supposed to do this. You know what? Yeah, it's the
cool.
reason this sucks is because
Like I could do this.
yeah, it was like, well, I could do better. Yeah, you could.
We've
So
run
go
into
do
this
that.
before, where oftentimes it's how kind of some of the best stuff happens.
It really
when
is.
You see something bad,
Like this sucks. I could do this way better. Like,
Right.
We've seen this a few times with people, and I think I'm a little guilty of it too. Of saying, "Hey, this could be better. I could do this." And so
which is
I
a
think
powerful, like when you feel a connection to it, you're like, I can make this better, and it should be meaningful. Like that, a sermon should be meaningful. People should grab something from it. If they're not, like, wait,
Something's wrong.
I could,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's it.
Yeah,
Something's wrong.
So I'm guessing you take that approach to, when you're doing ministry and things like that, is to be engaging and to make sure that you're connecting with somebody. I think is
Exactly.
probably the best move.
Well, and so much of that, in my experience, is about connecting to their experiences.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's a trend I think generally we're seeing in ministry and churches right now, is away from the old way of doing things that was so prevalent through like the 1950s, was the idea of clergy being people who were set apart from everybody else. They were different. They just weren't doing the same things in their life. And of course, back to things like the Jesuit or Catholic tradition, there are really huge lines there.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
nope, you're not going to have a family. Nope, you're not going to ever father a child. At least you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
You have these things that were really bright lines. And the problem with that, of course, even though it can be good in some ways from a theological perspective, you say, okay, you're making sure somebody's devoted to God, that's the center of their life, fine and good. But most of the members of their churches aren't like that. They live normal, real, secular lives day to day. And what they really need is somebody who can actually help them through that. That's what it is. It's how do you connect these ideas you have about God or faith or hope or peace or any of these kinds of things, or forgiveness. How do you connect them into real life?
Yeah.
That's always the struggle. And so for that, you kind of do need people who live real lives,
Right.
normal
I
lives.
was going to say, not to get too deep on it, but I think that there's that element of like, that might have been great in biblical times to be a person that lived a straight and narrow this is your track life.
Yeah.
But I think, people are more complex than that now. And that's where something like where you
Right.
come in, where you have, like you said, you live a real life, you do real, things, and you're more than just, I have to live this one path.
Yeah. Like it is always
Exactly.
funny to me, like how marriage ministry is with like a priest, and it's like, I don't know how that's, like interesting, okay, I mean, and I know there's like some married couples that do it, but generally that was always just like an oxymoron to me. And as someone who's gone through it and benefited from it, but it's like, that's, I'm surprised that Father Patrick knows, about marriage. Like that's just like a funny thing. And but like, to have that real life example, and I'm sure you connect with people so easily like that, of like, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, I have kids, I have a family, I get it, like I know what you're going through, and you're able to really find an intimate connection.
Absolutely. And that's what ministry is really all about. And it's also, I think, where the skills, or maybe not skills is the right word, where my experiences from things like law, civics, even doing domestic violence dockets, make a difference, because you're dealing with people at incredibly difficult points in their lives. You're dealing with really difficult conflicts, maybe between laws, or between the law and what's sort of expedient or easy for somebody. And that's so much of what organized faith is. Any of us can just say, I'm just going to go read the Bible or the Quran or the Talmud, whatever my particular choice is, and I can just go do that. But when you're talking about people coming together in a sense of faith, it's really about dealing with sort of the conflicts and the disagreements and the places where things don't seem to line up neatly and easily and cleanly, and saying, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how law is.
That's right. I mean, it is.
I was gonna say, is there any tie? I mean, you famously hear church and state.
Yeah,
but
right.
I mean, does that sort of tie into kind of your work too, where you kind of feel it bleed in? I would imagine so, in the sense of like, just in general wanting the best for someone, especially somebody that has fallen on some hard times and may or may not have made the best decisions because of that,
Right. And both, both if sort of done right, are about trying to make positive changes in ways, and often about trying to rebalance power structures that are out of balance. That's something that is both a feature of civil rights law and of Christian ministry that go hand in hand. In civil rights law, you're always fighting the David versus Goliath battle. You're always coming in fighting for somebody who is victimized because they were vulnerable to it, because somebody else had more power and they were fine using it to hurt this person. Usually somebody in government, but not always. And similarly, I think when you're dealing with ministry, it's kind of the same thing in a way. You're always kind of dealing with somebody who is usually searching for something more in their life. And this is true of me. When I think about what it means to be a minister, I often think of my own experience and just the searching that I'm always going through.
Yeah.
And the way I look at it, and I hit on this years ago, is the idea that I'm never going to have all the answers, and I'm never going to stop looking for them. I will be changing my mind about things. I'll be considering new information the day I die, and that's normal and okay. And that's kind of the opposite of the very conservative approaches you see to either law or Christianity that I grew up with.
Hey, look, it was this way. It's always this
how it
way
is.
Forever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. And I have to imagine now, just to go into the Marquette professor part too, that the connection with students probably has some type of the same, you understand what they're going through. You've been there. You're working with them, and have you I know you've been there for a semester, but did you find yourself having conversations that were more than just what page do I have to read today, finding out more about their lives, or just just generally what's going on campus, that there had to be a part of that was cool to connect to.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And particularly because most of the students I've been working with this semester are essentially criminal justice students in either upper end of undergrad or in this graduate program that Marquette has that's incredibly cool. It's a specific master's program in law enforcement data analytics, which is this huge new field, relatively new field in law enforcement, that can kind of be used for good or for evil.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's ways...
Data
plays on everyone's team.
So teaching an ethics course to these folks is really interesting because you're looking at the same technology that can be used to help police better respond to violence or prevent it is also technology that can snoop on people in really freakish ways.
Yeah, right.
And how much of it is going on even in our community. So one of the little known things here in Milwaukee that I had no idea existed until I was teaching this course and doing research, as I was preparing it. And I'm assuming, I want to see if either of you guys know, if listeners know, if I go fire off a gun somewhere in Milwaukee, did you know there is actually a network of microphones listening for it all the time?
I actually did know that.
You did? Okay.
Shot spotter, right?
Yep.
It's called,
Yep. There is, and this is true in a lot of cities where they now do networks of essentially sound monitoring to triangulate the positions of things like gunfire.
Wow.
Which is actually pretty darn smart if you think about it, because it's easy to do. You have the crack of a gun, and if you've got different stations, boom, a computer can say, well, it's roughly within this block area. But at the same time, I mean, it sure produces some strange privacy considerations when you think about
I want
the
to
fact.
preference. I only know this because I used to work at a fireworks store in college.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
naturally, we would hear about in Milwaukee it's hard, but because people can actually hear when your fireworks go off because they're shot spotter.
Right.
That's the only reason I know. And I also am part of the Bayview Town Hall Facebook group, which anytime they hear fireworks, they think that it's
everyone thinks it's
gunfire.
So somebody would say
inevitably on July 3rd, what's going on out there?
Yeah, they always think that there's gunfire on July 3rd and 4th.
Right.
Which probably means, as a practical matter, if you're going to try to do something bad with a gun in Milwaukee, I assume that means you probably ought to do it on the 3rd or 4th of July. Right.
Yeah.
Just as a practical matter. I'm not suggesting.
It was great to have you on the show.
I always do the disclaimer. In fact, with my students this fall, because it was an ethics course, ethics and criminal justice. Of course, we have to go through things like academic integrity, don't cheat. But I did actually have to confess. I said, guys, don't cheat, please. But if you're going to, I do appreciate the irony of you doing it in an ethics class.
Yes, that's actually a really good way to say it.
I do kind of respect that.
That's
like,
not lost on you.
Don't do it, but if you will,
times. Yeah.
it was kind of like the advice too. I gave them at one point from my experience with dealing with drug interdiction as a prosecutor and saying, okay, you wouldn't believe how often it is that people have weed in their center consoles. For whatever reason, that's where they keep it. I'm not a weed guy. I don't know why. Maybe they do, ask somebody who uses it, but cops know to look there. So guys, if you're going to take drugs in your car, don't put them in the center console.
Yeah, that's not the spot.
They look.
Apparently that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
So I do often do those kind of disclaimed things. I'm not telling you to do this bad thing, but if you're gonna, apparently this is the best way to do it.
I'm just going to approach it logically.
Exactly.
Which I can appreciate that, the academic part of that, of this is the way,
Exactly.
If I were to do it, this is how I would approach it. I can understand. That's great. That's great.
This has been really awesome.
Yeah.
I think that if I'm tying anything together from all of this, it seems like you are a person that just wants the best for people. And wants to educate people on that or help the person that is down. And it seems like you've really been able to take your worldview and your life experiences and tie them all together in ways that maybe we all don't even think about.
Yeah,
happens,
I think there's a very clear linear sort of connection with all the experiences you've had that have gotten you to what you're doing now. And I think that's really cool. And that doesn't always happen. We sort of have people that are like, I do that and I also just do this. We're like, that's really cool. And
yeah,
like this,
they're unrelated.
Those paths kind of, as I'm going up and they've connected, which is great. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And why you're good at what you're doing right now is because of those scenarios you put yourself into. So that's really cool.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying I'm good at what I'm doing. I'm getting better at it. That's what I always try to say to folks is it's not about saying, oh yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing. It's about thinking every time, how can I do it, a little bit better, or what can I learn from? I mean, in law, this has been true for my whole career. When you do something stupid, when you lose, when you mess up, those are the things that actually stick with you, where you think through, what do I do with that? Victories, oh yeah, I won this case or that case, don't really stick with you because you they're not really useful. And the first time I gave a sermon at our church, which is United Methodist Church of Whitefish Bay, was not too long ago. The first time I just did a regular sermon at the service, doing the pastor thing. So I got probably conservatively 50 versions of, oh my God, that was incredible. That was so great. You are so good. Just the various laudation. And it's wonderful. And it's great. And it's validating. But the one that stuck out, there was one critical comment that somebody made. And it had to do with some messaging in the sermon that I never thought about. Well, it could have been interpreted this way, and that might be a little different. I won't go into all the specifics of what it was, but that one made such a huge difference. That was the useful one. That was the one.
Funny. People are like, so good. It's like, tell me actually what I can do.
And now I know if I did that sermon again, I did this topic, now I would know how to approach that differently.
Yeah, that happens to me as a speaker all the time, especially if I try something new. I'm like I have friends oh, that's so great, great job. I'm like, I really want you to tell me what did you take away? What was specific? I've changed so many things based on one piece of feedback. It's so valuable, and people that care are typically the ones that are going to give it.
Absolutely.
I want you to be transparent. How did that go? And if it didn't go well, let me figure this out. And I've grown so much as a speaker because of those.
Jim, I'm just gonna be negative with you from now on.
From now on,
just so you can be your best you.
You know how I feel about negativity. I love it. Just bring it.
Well, I hate that you love it. How about that? If you can change that, that'd be good.
Very meta. The kind of I'm going to be negative about your negativity or positivity.
See, I'm just.
This is getting too complicated.
Because I want the best for you.
This is what I deal with.
There are too many double and triple negatives in this. We're going to lose track of kind of what's the negative.
Yes, I'm going to be so negative it ends up being positive for you.
What a wild turn of events.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Yes,
we really
thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Yeah.
And if people want to get in touch with you, particularly about ministry, or what's the best place to do that?
I've got an office here in Milwaukee, and it's Brady at creamcity.law.
I love that name.
That's one of the easiest. Or it's easy to get a hold of me. Come by our church, Whitefish Bay. At least for a while, I'm there. I'm actually coming in as chair of what we call the Accountable Leadership Board this next year. That may have to change at some point later in the year because I am transitioning eventually from lay minister to vocational ministry. Still part time, but it's as you kind of progress in the side hustle, so to speak. You know, you progress into something where you can't be both staff, clergy, and kind of the lay board type. You know, at some point you have to sort of go from one to the other.
I feel that.
And we'll see. That may be where I go, but and it's possible that at some point soon I may not be able to really stay at Whitefish Bay. You know, the Methodist Church is a church where people kind of get assigned, and they say, "Man, this church really needs somebody over here." And in Wisconsin, there's a shortage of clergy.
No doubt.
People aren't going into it as much. People aren't staying into it, unfortunately. And, you know, churches everywhere are just going through an incredibly rough time. And it's sad because it's at a time when, frankly, people probably need more guidance or just safe space to deal with sort of meaning and purpose. And people, I think, have... I'm trying to think how to put it. You know, if there's ever a time now, it's post-pandemic when we can find ourselves suddenly leading lives that are so isolated, that are so just kind of hollow. And then we get back and say, okay, what do I do about that?
Yeah. Reconnecting to normalcy.
It's important.
Exactly.
You know?
And sometimes changing the normal.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a lot of it too. And one of the things that was happening before the pandemic to both law and to faith was, and I hope is still, you know, so much more of an awareness of all kinds of systemic issues of racism, of equity or lack of equity, where people were really reconsidering some stuff that hadn't been talked about a lot in decades. So I'm hoping that survives the pandemic too.
Right.
And in both of my
We just have a better world going for it out there.
Right.
But wherever you do end up, they're definitely going to be very fortunate to have you.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for being on. Thank you for, sharing your story with us. It's super inspiring for sure. And I think eye-opening to some people that maybe, like we said, thought of ministry as one way and law as one way. So I'm glad that we're here to have you on for that sort of thing. If you are listening for the first time, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank all of you for, if you're listening, watching for the first time, thank you. You can follow this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are also available on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok and YouTube as Hustling Sideways.
That's
We're
us.
all over the place. If you've got a side hustle of your own, you can send us an email. It's hustlingsideways@gmail.com. And you too could be on this show, and we could be talking to you about your side hustle, your passion project, the things that you do, and how that helps live a more fulfilling life because of it.
Yes. So come join us. Give us 5 stars. Any rating you're able to
rate
give.
us wherever you can rate us 5 stars. It does help us out. Apparently. So I don't know. That's what everybody says it.
Well, on that
it does help us out.
Keep on hustling.
We'll see you next week.